What happened to the Confederate spy network after the war? During the Civil War, the Confederacy relied heavily on spies. They used secret couriers, codebooks, invisible ink, smuggling routes, and networks that stretched from Richmond to Canada. These spies carried sensitive information through dangerous territory. Some worked in Union, controlled cities. Others operated quietly in Washington. A few even used their social status to gather intelligence at political events and military gatherings. But when the war ended in 1865, that entire world of espionage vanished overnight. These men and women had spent years living double lives. Suddenly the Confederacy was gone, their missions were over, and the United States government knew exactly who many of them were. Some fled. Some reinvented themselves. A few tried to defend their past. Many slipped back into ordinary life without ever speaking of their work again. This video looks at what happened to the Confederate spy network after the war. The collapse of Confederate intelligence. By the spring of 1865, the Confederate government was already falling apart. Richmond had been evacuated. Files were burned. Couriers scattered. The secret communication systems that had once linked spies across the South simply stopped functioning. The Confederate Secret Service had been involved in everything from intelligence gathering to sabotage plots. But once the war ended, there was no government to protect those agents. There were no pensions, no debriefings, and no formal recognition. These spies became private citizens again, but their past work could still make them targets. Some destroyed their own records in fear that the United States would charge them with treason or espionage. In many cases, this left huge gaps in the historical record. We know the names of some Confederate spies, but we will never know the full story of the network because much of it was erased by the people who lived it. Women who returned to private life. Women played a major role in Confederate intelligence. They carried messages under clothing, hid documents in their hair, and passed information through domestic networks. After the war, most of them returned quietly to private life. Here are a few examples of what happened to them. Rose O'Neill Greenhow. Rose Greenhow had been one of the South's most successful spies early in the war. She gathered information in Washington and passed it to Confederate generals. She even traveled to Europe to seek support for the South. She died in 1864, before the war ended, when her boat capsized off the coast of North Carolina. Her daughter, Rose Greenhow Jr., returned to Washington later in life and rarely spoke about her mother's work. People close to her said she lived with a sense of loss and tried to shape a normal life out of an extraordinary past. Belle Boyd. Belle Boyd was only a teenager when she began spying for the Confederacy. She became famous for smuggling information to Stonewall Jackson during the Valley Campaign. After the war, she turned her story into a career. She wrote a memoir, worked as an actress, and gave public lectures. Belle Boyd embraced her past openly. She made a living by turning her espionage into entertainment. Her dramatic personality made her a favorite among audiences. But her personal life was unstable. She married 3 times, moved frequently, and faced financial problems. She died in 1900 while on a speaking tour. Elizabeth Van Lew. Elizabeth Van Lew worked for the Union, but her Richmond operations played a major role in undermining Confederate espionage. After the war, she became a pariah in her own city because she had supported the North. Even though she had helped the United States, her neighbors never forgave her. Her story is important because it shows how dangerous the world of espionage was. Spies on both sides returned to communities that remembered everything: male spies and the danger of returning home. Male spies faced different challenges. SOME had worked in uniform as scouts or couriers. Others had disguised themselves completely and blended into enemy territory. Going home was not always safe, especially for spies who had operated in Union states. The Confederate Secret Service operated mostly from Richmond and Canada. Many of these agents had taken part in sabotage missions, smuggling rings and plots against Union targets. Some had been involved in the attempts to burn New York City or blow up Union ships. After the war, many of them scattered. Some went to Canada to avoid possible arrest. Canada had served as a base for Confederate operations during the war, and some agents believed it was safer to stay there than return to the United States. Others changed their names and blended back into society. They became farmers, clerks, lawyers, and merchants. The United States government arrested a few of them, but most were never charged. The priority after the war was rebuilding the country rather than dragging hundreds of spies into court. Fear of treason trials. In 1865, former spies worried that the United States would punish them harshly. Espionage is a serious crime during wartime, and many Confederate agents had been deeply involved in covert operations. But trials never came. The federal government wanted peace, not political chaos. Large-scale prosecutions would have required massive investigations and would have stirred up anger in a country that was already struggling through Reconstruction. As a result, most Confederate spies simply resumed ordinary lives. The United States rarely pursued them unless they were involved in other crimes or had played a major role in wartime sabotage. The Canadian connection. During the last years of the war, the Confederacy used Canada as a base for clandestine operations. Agents in Montreal and Toronto planned raids, printed documents, and coordinated with Southern sympathizers. After the war, many of these agents stayed in Canada. They found work in banks, law offices, and trading companies. Some kept friendships formed during the war. Others married Canadians and never returned home. A few returned to the United States once it was clear that the government was not hunting them. But for years, Canada remained a safe refuge for those who feared retribution. Confederate couriers in the Western Theater. Confederate couriers who had worked in the Western states faced different challenges. They had operated in regions where the lines between Union and Confederate territory shifted constantly. Many had worked as scouts or guides rather than secret agents. When the war ended, these men often returned to farming or ranching. Others moved west and became cowboys, lawmen, or settlers. The skills they gained during the war, such as navigation, tracking, and horseback riding, fit naturally into frontier life. For many Western couriers, the transition from war to peace was smoother than it was for spies, who had worked in cities or political circles. The fate of Confederate codebreakers. The Confederacy had a small number of men who specialized in codes, ciphers, and secret communication. After the war, these men found civilian work in surprising places. Some became lawyers. Others became editors or public servants. A few worked as accountants or bookkeepers. Their analytical training transferred easily to business and public administration. They rarely talked about their work. Some of their letters and journals survived, but most of their stories remain hidden. Assassination plots and their aftermath. One of the most sensitive subjects surrounding Confederate espionage is the connection to John Wilkes Booth and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Evidence shows that Booth had contact with Confederate agents in Canada and may have hoped they would support his plans. However, there is no proof that the Confederate government officially ordered the assassination. Still, because of these connections, some Confederate agents feared they would be blamed. A few fled to Europe or South America. Others burned records or avoided talking about their wartime activities for the rest of their lives. The Lincoln assassination cast a long shadow over anyone connected to the Confederate Secret Service, the rise of post-war myth-making. As the years passed, former Confederate spies faced a new challenge. People wanted stories. They wanted tales of intrigue, hidden messages, coded letters, and dramatic escapes. Many spies refused to talk, especially those who wanted to leave the past behind. But a few embraced the attention. Belle Boyd toured the country telling stories from her days as a spy. Others wrote memoirs that mixed truth with exaggeration. Some of these stories later shaped the romantic image of Confederate spycraft. At the same time, Southern memorial groups used the idea of noble espionage to support the lost cause narrative. They highlighted stories that made the Confederacy seem heroic and minimized those that involved sabotage or darker operations. Over time, the public memory of Confederate spies became a mix of fact, rumor, and carefully shaped legend. A quiet ending for most spies. While a few spies became famous, most returned to quiet lives. Some worked in stores or became bookkeepers. Others opened boarding houses or ran small farms. A few became teachers or ministers. Many married and raised families who never fully knew what they had done during the war. Their secret roles faded into family stories, old letters, and occasional newspaper interviews. Their lives after the war were often strikingly ordinary. That may be the most surprising part of this story. People who once lived in a dangerous world of hidden messages and secret meetings ended up living peaceful lives that would never appear in history books. The Confederate spy network dissolved the moment the war ended. Its agents scattered across the South, the North, Canada, and even overseas. Some became writers or entertainers. Others blended into ordinary jobs. A few lived with fear for years, worried they might be held responsible for wartime plots. Their lives after Appomattox show how quickly an underground world can disappear once its purpose is gone. The Confederacy vanished in 1865, and the people who had served it in secret had to reinvent themselves from scratch. Thank you for watching. If you want more videos like this, let us know in the comments. We will see you in the next one.